Alright, so today we're going to be going over two MP5Ks. Both of them are outfitted with FRT lowers, and we're just going to be kind of going through it. One is more of kind of your budget option, which is the Mp5 with the L2 Prince lower. Alright, so today we're going to be going over two MP5Ks. Both of them are outfitted with FRT lowers, and we're just going to be kind of going through it. One is more of kind of your budget option, which is the Mp5 with the L2 Prince lower. So one quick thing we want to go over, before we put a few rounds down range, is trigger pull. I would say the one with the Geisley, outfitted on the lower is definitely an extremely light trigger pull, super crisp, fast reset. You can see it here. I'd say that's 3 pounds or less, and a really, really quick reset. All right, so now let's check out the Mp5. Hold on 1 second, Ren. So Mp5, while it's got the flat trigger, it is a nice trigger, much better than, the standard kind of Mp5 trigger. It's still a little bit clunkier, reset. It's not bad, it's still a big upgrade from your standard trigger. But I would still say, hands down, the Geisley is better. Alright, so we've moved down to the range. We're going to get some mags set up, get cued in, and probably start off with the Mac, put a few mags through that one, and then switch over to the PTR, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. Alright, so first up, we've got the Mp5 with the L2 Prince lower. I'm going to put a few shots down, just regular semi mode, and then, put a few down with the FRT, and then we'll switch over to the PTR and do the same thing. Alright, so here we go. A few down range, I've got a target set up. We'll send a few semi and then switch over to fun mode. Alright, here we go. Alright, so now we got the PTR. This one's got the AS Designs lower. I would consider this one more of a Gucci variant. It definitely costs a little bit more. So let's do the same sequence series, firing schedule here, and then we'll talk about it. Alright, semi. Alright. So from, roughly 20 yards, this is the Mp5 target. We can see we kind of, fabbed up kind of a, a A zone there. Most of those were at least on target, but, accuracy so-so. We'll move over here to the PTR. Kind of somewhat of a similar, shot spread there from, like I said, roughly 20 yards away. I would say overall price difference, the Mp5k, like I stated before, is probably a price difference of, $500 to $600, more for the PTR with the AS Designs lower, Geisley trigger. I will say, having both of them, shooting both of them, this one has definitely been a lot less troublesome. It just seems to, after I went through a few, slight growing pains, this thing just kind of runs, straight through. The Mp5, occasionally I'll get a failure to eject, failure to feed. Just kind of, I would say out of 500 shots on the Mp5, I've probably had 20 plus failures. On the PTR, roughly probably 500 rounds that have gone through this, I might have had maybe 5 failures. So in my opinion, if you have the money, buy the PTR with the AS Designs lower, you know, I think you can't really go wrong. Could it be that the Mp5k, you know, it's just, you know, a bad clone in itself? You know, maybe if you had the PTR, you could save some money by just getting the L2 Prince lower instead of the AS Designs lower, because, you know, that'd save you probably $200-300. But regardless, you know, both of them are fun. You know, definitely had to put a lot more work in with the Mp5. But all in all, you know, I learned a lot kind of putting them both together, and ultimately they're both a lot of fun. So if you like this, you know, drop a like down below, throwing up some videos. Peace.